Welcome to the Avro Heritage Museum podcast, supported by Museum Development North and Arts Council England.
Hello and welcome to the second part of the conversation that Frank Plezek and I had with Paul Ormerod, son of flight engineer Curly Ormerod, who served in Lancaster's on 101 Squadron. Today, we're going to be hearing about the reliability of the Rolls Royce Merlin engine, as well as about the role of the flight engineer when there was engine damage on an operation. And we learn how the impact of bombs exploding on the ground, thousands of feet below the aircraft, could still be felt by the aircrew. And when hostilities are over, Paul's dad gets the chance to ferry nurses to Singapore, flying into a primitive version of Changi Airport, as well as doing ultra-low-level flights around the pyramids. But Paul began by telling the story of how drawing the short straw proved to be the very opposite of unlucky for his dad.
When he started at the end of November 1943, he arrived with two other engineers, and they were all of them were due to have leave, but the losses were so high at the time that they went straight into active service. And so the commanding officer said, well, okay. He actually had some straws that they drew an old-fashioned way. And my dad drew the short straw. So he was disappointed not to get leave. And so he flew 5 operations with his first crew. And then when he got back, he went into the mess. And I think that the barman must have been from Lancashire or Yorkshire. He said, a bit of a bad do about your crew. He said, why, what's that, what they've been up to? He said, they've all gone missing. And in fact, they were shot down with only one survivor. So he was actually quite fortunate.
There's some terrible stories like that. I mean,
we've heard others, haven't we?
Yeah.
It's just like the toss of a coin.
Yeah, we went to a talk last week with a guy who's done a podcast for us, and his father was a flight engineer, and he was at, you mentioned a master bomber before. He was on a master bomber. It was incredible, really, the story. I mean, we've had a few flight engineers, and they went through what was known as the number 4 School of Technical Training, which is where they did their initial training to be a flight engineer.
How long would a flight engineer, on average, take to be trained?
I've seen the syllabus, and it was about 6 months, but a lot of them went through a lot quicker than that, because they were basically what had happened when they introduced the Lancaster was the last of the 3 big 4-engine bombers to be introduced. The Sterling was the first, and then the Halifax and the Lancaster was introduced in 1942. And because there was a shortage of pilots, they introduced a new role, which was the flight engineer.
So that was the first one to have that, was it, the Lancaster?
So they had to have this special training to convert them mainly from ground engineers. They'd been seasoned ground engineers, and they were converted in it. And I think they were fast tracked because they had engineering experience. But I think the actual basic training was about 6 months. And Lancasters were the number 4 School of Technical Training, which was at St Athan in South Wales.
So he did that. Although he said when he'd done his first tour, right, he was on Berlin, he said he was certain he wouldn't survive. He said nothing could have prepared you for what it was actually like.
It's incredible.
But he did.
I mean, going back to this electronic countermeasures and the airborne cigar, I mean, it was so significant that even once the war was over, they actually did trials on the German air defense systems that were still working to test the overall effectiveness of this electronic warfare. It was actually called post-mortem, and I don't know I know your dad wasn't flying by then, but certainly John Monaghan, in his logbook, you see that he goes on these post-mortem, and it's where they're assessing these German radar stations through this electric countermeasures that they've been doing. So
he was flying because of the demobilisation of millions of people in the armed forces. It took 2 or 3 years to return them all to the peacetime economy. And so for quite a long time, he flew the successor to the Lancaster, the Yawl, on commercial trips, although he's still in the RAF, his RAF crew, to Singapore. And he said it took 4 days. And he said Changi Airport, which of course in Singapore is now a gigantic international hub, he said there were just 2 mud huts. He said that it was just like an airstrip and 2 huts, and that was Changi Airport. But he said his most memorable one was that for some reason, because they were taking a party of Dutch nurses, because then, of course, Indonesia was still a Dutch colony, and that's very close to Singapore. They're taking them. And when they took off from Cairo, they actually flew round the pyramids, sort of pyramid height. They gave them a tour around the pyramids. They flew around twice. And probably, the only people, it'd be absolutely impossible now.
No.
So he did continue flying for a couple of years.
Doing a bit of research for this, Paul, I came across, I can't remember what the source was, but there was a quote from your dad. It actually talks about Curly Ormerod. That was his nickname, wasn't it?
Yeah. His hair, it was wavy. But in fact, so when I was young, I used to have curly hair.
As I remember, Paul, because we were at school together.
Oh, right, okay.
In that particular bit I read, he was actually talking about the basically the reliability of the aircraft, and the point you mentioned earlier, that even with 1 engine down, 2 engine down, that presumably that was a feature of the aircraft, was it, Frank, that they could keep going?
Yeah. Not unlike the Manchester,
which
only had an engine.
Only had 2 anyway.
They had 2 unreliable engines. If they lost one of them, that was it.
But it could take a lot of damage.
It could.
So, and there's one trip, and I can't remember which one it was. I don't think they were damaged. I think the wind speeds were much stronger, obviously in one direction than was anticipated. So they used a lot more fuel, and they landed. He said they had 1 minute flying time left. He said he was sweating all the way back, trying to absolutely maximize fuel consumption, switching this and switching that and juggling it around. But they managed to. In fact, he did say they were so short that when they were over England, the pilot said, "Well, maybe we should think about, give you the choice of bailing out, and I'll just set it to fly over the sea." And they all said, no, just let's try and land.
Yeah.
And they managed to do that.
Yeah. And the other thing about losing an engine, I mean, each of the engine had a hydraulic pump and they drove different systems. So if you lost an engine, you didn't just lose the engine. You lost, some of them would drive the undercarriage, some of them would drive the turrets or whatever. But the bomb bay doors, I think, were hydraulically operated from one of the, they could all be done manually, but if you lost an engine, you lost a significant.
So, and if that happens, then Frank, in the emergency, presumably the flight engineer has really got to work very rapidly in very close conjunction with the pilot to decide what action to take now.
Well, yeah, but also the flight engineer, I mean, you've seen it in ours. He had a panel in front of him. He had a little, not even a proper seat, the flight engineer.
The dicky seat, wasn't it?
He had a full dicky seat, yeah. And he had a panel behind him. So I'm told that, and I don't know whether this is true of your dad, but they would prefer flight engineers to stand up through missions because they were managing systems in the front and behind them,
we never met. I think he sat down, but I think his first task when an engine going out, it wasn't usually an engine failure. It was because he'd been hit by a fighter or by anti-aircraft fire. Yeah. So his first task was to put the flames out. Yeah. So that was his initial thing. They had to do that very rapidly to stop it spreading.
You've mentioned your dad's logbook, Paul. Have you got some really good memorabilia? Have some things been retained?
Well, no, just his logbook, because he did have his distinguished flying medal. But I remember when I was at school, there was a trip to Paris, and of course I'd never been abroad. And he was a skilled worker, but he was a skilled worker, so he didn't have much money, and so he sold that so I could go on the trip. And then in later years, I did say, well, look, I can buy one for you. It won't be, but he said it wasn't worth it. He said he knew he'd got it, and that was what counted.
Well, DFMs were they're very rare because during the war, awards to the aircrew were, if it was a commissioned officer, they got a DFC, which is a Distinguished Flying Cross. The non-commissioned officers, like your dad, would have got a DFM, so a Distinguished Flying Medal. But after the war, they stopped doing that and they all got a DFC. So DFMs are a much rarer and more sought-after medal than a DFC. Very rare now.
In fact, after the war, he went with his dad. So he actually received it from the king. I think the night before, they said, let's go out for a pint. And so I think they went to the first pub and they'd run out of beer. So they walked down the road to the next one. And the goes to the bar 2 pints, said, "Have you got any glasses?" "Oh, no, well, if you have not a glass, we can't serve you." And so the third one, they went in and my granddad said to him, "Oh, look, there's 2 glasses, just get hold of them." So they went up to the bar and the barman said, "Are those your glasses?" And he said, "Yes." Yes, he would say. And he said, "Oh, you've had your ration." And that was it. So so that was what life was like.
Yeah.
So, you think, well, people today, all prices gone up. Well, it's something and nothing.
Looking back, do you sense it made a big difference, a big impact on the rest of his life, having gone through what he went through?
It obviously did. He was very sort of phlegmatic, but I suppose that's why he was selected for aircrew, in the first place. You had to be able to brush things off. But it also, I think, he never really had any interest in sporting contests, for example. Whereas my uncles were all either, they all either followed Rochdale Football Club or Rochdale Hornets Rugby League Club, but he never had any interest. And I suppose, you could see why. Why would he get excited about, whether a team wins or not?
We've not mentioned it, but you've got a lovely, it's a painting, isn't it, that we've got a photo of there. Just talk us through that.
It's a photograph of the actual squadron on the runways, and there are two Lancaster aircraft, and the runways covered in snow. But of course, they couldn't let a mere thing like snow stop them from taking off, and so they had. I think the photograph, it is signed by all the crew. We're all still alive, and it's called Maximum Effort. And it's got one of them's my dad's aircraft. In fact, it's signed by both crews, the 2 aircraft. It's called Maximum Effort because it was a maximum effort to clear the runway. Even the air crews were given shovels and had to shovel away the snow. And I'm sure they had mixed feelings about this, thinking, we're clearing the runway so we can take off and get shot at. But it was a maximum effort. In fact, the guy, the artist Philip West, he's painted quite a few of Lancasters from 101 Squadron. I think this might be from an actually illegal photograph. I don't know, but he's got one, for example, of my dad's aircraft over the target. And he gives a good impression of that. So there are quite a few paintings like that.
Well, what's interesting for me is that you can very clearly see those 2 aerials on the dorsal side of the of both Lancasters.
Oh yes.
Those were the special aerials because it was an airborne cigar operation.
Yeah.
For the equipment that was the special equipment that nobody seems to know what it was. But and the squadron code SR. I think it's been very clear. I mean, it's been a great listening to your dad's stories and the fact that it's such a little known aspect of Lancaster operations. I don't know many people that know anything or have even heard of airborne cigar.
Yeah.
And the fact that, we all talk about a Lancaster having 7 crew members. Well, they didn't.
Not always. Because they also had a homing pigeon, which our colleague Brian Frakes always talks about.
Yeah, some of them, yeah.
Yeah. I'd just like to end, though, Paul, with bringing you back to the visit you made to the museum a month or so ago, and I think you enjoyed that. Just share with us for a moment or two, though, how you felt, first of all, going in the cockpit, and then also what you made of the virtual reality experience afterwards. Just tell us about your cockpit visit first.
Well, I thought the cockpit visit was great because, you could see what he'd actually done, and that was the main thing. And I suppose a striking feature was how small the amount of room was for them. Like I said earlier, the aircraft was basically a gigantic bomb bay, and it really was. And there was, everything was absolutely crammed in, so they could get maximum armaments on board. So that was it was really really interesting, really instructive. So that was really good. I thought the virtual tour. I thought the BBC guys have been absolutely mad. But
I don't think he had much choice, really.
But he did it, and he survived it. And that was interesting. I think I just felt, like I say, over the target, maybe it wasn't, according to my dad, maybe it wasn't quite bright enough. And maybe I'm not quite sure. I might have been expecting, more action over the target. Maybe this crew were lucky on that particular tour, they didn't get any. But I do get the impression that when they were actually over the target, there was just terror just gripped them all, because they were at maximum exposure at any time of being blown out of the sky.
Yeah.
Now, how you, and of course, the radio operator, the BBC man at the time, the radio man, doesn't convey this because obviously, that wasn't his job at the time.
He's also, starved of oxygen, and I think that might almost calm him down. I think it slows him down a bit because the microphone, it doesn't quite fit.
Yeah,
in terms of the oxygen mask and the microphone, there's a seepage of oxygen.
It's probably just as well, but it doesn't convey.
It probably was just as well.
I mean, I'm not sure how you could do it, but I'm not familiar with these things. But it doesn't convey, in a sense, the acute tension that they all felt over the target.
Yeah, taking up your point though, Frank's mentioned we've spoken to quite a few actual veterans, haven't we? And I spoke to a flight engineer, I think he was 100, and I asked him, and it always sounds like a daft question, how did it feel at that moment, when you're over the target? And his reply was very simple: absolutely terrified. And if anybody tells you anything else, they're lying.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
I think one thing I'd like to say is the fact that, we've talked about your dad being on the 101 Squadron that was electronic countermeasures, but actually they were actually on bombing missions at the same time. So they were actually taking a load to drop over somewhere, as well as doing this interception of German radio frequencies. Yeah. There's a picture here of a Lancaster dropping some bombs. This is a 101 Squadron. You can see the two radars.
Yeah.
And he's dropping what's known as a 4,000-pound cookie. But by the end of the war, Lancaster's a 617 Squadron and 9 Squadron were carrying 22,000 pounds, 10-ton Grand Slam bombs. And we've got one of those as well. You can have a look and you can just see how big this thing was. You talk about...
I think their actual bomb loads obviously varied according to what planners thought their role was, whether they were sending, lots of small ones to, destroy buildings.
Well, to carry the Grand Slam, it had to be a specially modified Lancaster. And you'll see the size.
No, because he'd stopped flying by the time the really big ones came in.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, he did say, think of the 4,000 pound ones, he said, if you flew over one that exploded, even at 20,000 feet, he said you knew that a bomb had gone off.
Yeah.
So they were 5 miles away, right? But they could feel the shock waves from the explosion.
Yeah.
So they were big bombs.
They were, yeah. And you'll see just how big this one of those cookies is. It's huge. It's a replica, but it's a full scale replica.
I didn't think you'd have a live one somehow.
Paul, thank you.
We've got nuclear weapons over there.
We have. They are all safe. Paul, thank you so much for coming back to the museum and agreeing to do this, because it's been a great experience. We really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks. Good.
Thank you to Paul for giving us so much detail based on those conversations with his dad and also on his dad's logbook. The story of the particular work of 101 Squadron is not so well known, and I certainly learned a lot. What struck me was the fortitude that people like John Ormerod displayed when they were all too aware of the odds that were stacked against them. They didn't have the benefit of the statistics that we now have, but they saw their close friends fall out of the sky. They saw the empty tables at breakfast after the sortie, and they saw their friends' belongings being removed from their lockers. They knew the skipper would be writing another letter of condolence to a family. To have any chance of a break from combat, you had to be lucky enough to survive a tour of 30 operational flights. In the case of Pathfinder crews, it was 45. At that point, they would usually be moved to other duties, often as instructors. But instructing had its dangers too, as it involved flying with inexperienced recruits in old aircraft. More than 8,000 men were killed in training accidents or other non-operational flying. After this respite, you would usually be asked to do another shorter tour. You will recall Curly Ormerod's conviction that having survived one tour, his number was definitely up, not something that any young man should ever have to contemplate. Whilst trying to build up to your 30 operations, inexperience and fatigue could easily prove fatal. If you were ever lucky enough to complete a whole tour, the most dangerous trips would probably be the first and the last 5. Bomber Command was standing by on every day of the war. If the weather was good enough, operations would be launched. In the sortie on Nuremberg, in which Curly Ormerod took part, 545 men were lost in a single night. That's more than the 500 pilots killed over the whole period of the Battle of Britain during the summer months of 1940. And unlike the Battle of Britain, there was ambiguity, a public moral debate around the justification for the loss of civilian life caused by the bombing of heavily populated industrial towns and cities. The historian Sir Max Hastings wrote, "It is one of life's unfairnesses that the public, to this day, cherishes the RAF's wartime fighter pilots with an uncomplicated enthusiasm that does not extend to the bomber crews who showed equal courage and suffered far heavier losses. We will never forget that." That's all we have time for today. If you haven't yet been to the Avro Heritage Museum, you will be very welcome, and you can try for yourself the 2 activities that Paul sampled on his visit, a 20-minute guided tour of our Lancaster cockpit, followed by our BBC virtual reality experience, based on a radio recording made in a Lancaster on an actual bombing sortie to Berlin in September 1943. If you like or subscribe to the podcast and you enable push notifications on your device, you will get an alert when the next episode becomes available. Until then, it's goodbye from me, Chris Bessick.
Make sure you follow us in your podcast app to ensure that you don't miss out on future episodes.